Good evening and welcome to a live broadcast from LaRouche TV. Tonight is March 1st, 2013, and you're tuning in for our weekly Friday evening live internet webcast with Mr. Lyndon Larouche. We will be following our usual format tonight. Mr. Larouche has some opening remarks, which will be followed by questions from Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein, who are joining us in the studio tonight. So without further introduction, I give you Mr. Lyndon Larouche.
Well, the times are interesting. It's a situation like warfare, where forces are beginning to range up against each other, and the outcome is not certain, but the tread of the foot is uncertain. And so we've come to a point where Obama is now being put to his test, and he may not make it. And the whole system may not make it, because we're on the verge of a general breakdown crisis. And this is something which has never quite occurred in the same way ever before in U.S. history. Though there are moments in periods of warfare which are, like the Woodward case this week, is something like a warning of warfare gone awry. And that's where we are now. And we're going to have to not jump to conclusions, except to notice that all is not well in the enemy camp. And we are being put to the test. And I think we're going to have an interesting evening this evening.
Well, let's get things started with the question about Obama, the dictator. Today is today's sequester day. So this is sort of maybe a holiday for Obama, where he gets to threaten people and cudgel them, and also promote the lie that it was the Republicans that caused this whole mess, when, as Bob Woodward had reported, it was Obama who had urged the Congress to create the mechanism for the automatic sequester that we're now facing. Bob Woodward, along with several other journalists, is now being threatened by the White House with the use of language unfit to print. Both him, Ron Fournier in the National Journal, Lanny Davis, and others are saying that the White House is threatening them if they tell the truth about the situation there. At the same time, let's put this in a larger context. Bradley Manning, who stands accused of violating the Espionage Act, entered several guilty pleas just the other day. Obama's administration claimed to be one of transparency and openness, yet he has been prosecuting whistleblowers with a ferocity never before seen. He's had more cases under the Espionage Act since it was created in World War I. At the same time, Obama the dictator is having some troubles getting Brennan in as the CIA director, where some congressmen and senators are still standing up saying that it's right for Americans to know what the law is regarding the government killing them. A couple of quotes on that. Congressman Goodlatte, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, said that the American people deserve to know the legal basis under which the Obama administration believes it can kill U.S. citizens, and under what circumstances. Senator Rand Paul is upset that he still hasn't gotten a response from the Obama administration on the question of killing American citizens in the U.S. Senator Paul said, "Americans thought it was important to get a warrant before tapping their telephone. I would think they want some due process before they are killed. To me, this pales in comparison to even warrantless wiretapping, because there it's an invasion of your privacy. Now we're talking about killing you." Now, sort of responding to this whole, this whole milieu of comments, Obama said today, when he was asked about the sequester and some other things, he said, "I am not a dictator. I am the president." On the sequester, he lied, saying, "What's important to understand is that not everyone will feel the pain of these cuts right away. The pain, though, will be real." He went into a long list about how people's livelihoods are going to be destroyed by the sequester. He said middle-class families will have their lives significantly impacted. military-related industries will have to have layoffs. Obama said none of this is necessary. It's happening because of a choice that the Republicans in Congress made. They've allowed these cuts to happen. That's a lie. That's the lie that Woodward's pointing out. That's the lie that the White House doesn't want exposed. And so here we are on the day of the sequester, and Obama's pretending that this is caused by the Republicans, when I'm sure that he is enjoying the opportunity. So what could you say about what to do with this dictator in the White House?
Well, I would say, as I just mentioned, that Obama is losing his nerve. He's caught lying. Now, if you are an effective dictator, you don't lie. You don't talk. If instead of lying, you be enigmatic. This guy is trying to use influence on the people he intends to eat. He lies to people and gets caught at it. That's not a smart dictator. That's not a smart opponent. This man is a failure. Now, he's also, we know he's a stooge. That is, there's no substance to Obama. There's all bluff. Now he's come to the point that he's run out of plausible bluffs, which do not involve exposing him as a liar. And what's happening is a very interesting game. You know, sometimes in going to a war, when two nations or forces go to war, they stomp around a bit and try to test the nerve of the other. And that's what's going on now. And I think Bob Woodward has been put in the position of giving a little test to Obama. Are you real, Obama? Or are you just a four-flusher caught out, you know, as we suspect you are? And that's it. We're in a point where this thing is going to war. The British monarchy is, which is the British Empire, is going into that direction. The whole system in the meantime is coming down. They're enraging the population. At the same time, the population no longer believes in them. So these are the conditions right now. It's getting very interesting. It's something like warfare. It's more like pre-nuclear warfare styles. What happened at the end of World War II with the thermonuclear, the nuclear explosions and so forth, changed things in terms of warfare. Warfare could no longer be the same as it was before. No longer 19th century, earlier 20th century warfare. That's all past. We're now in a new situation where you're playing around with weapons which you dare not play with. Thermonuclear weapons are not things you can play with. But Obama is playing with the threat of thermonuclear war, and he hasn't got the restraint or the brains to do it. He's a problem for his mistress, the Queen of England. We're going to see what happens on that one.
Now, in addition to the sequestration issue that's happening in the United States, there's major upheaval in the entire transatlantic region. And I think that what really brought this situation to a head were the recent elections in Italy, where basically Italy is unable to form a government. The Mario Monti government, which was the technocratic government that was meant to implement the cuts to let the blood run out in the streets in the hopes that somebody else might mop it up. And that he came out of these elections with about 10% of the vote. A comedian took a significant part, but what was significant was Berlusconi's re-entry into politics. But without going into too much depth on the election per se, the entire situation in Europe is now utterly ungovernable, with the no confidence vote in Latvia, you have 11 out of 17 of the European Union nations have, European Union nation governments have fallen. And this is the pathway of the Troika of the European Union. It was interesting also that an Irish trade union head recently made a statement that the Troika has done more damage to the nation of Ireland in Ireland's membership in the EU than 800 years under the British Empire. So, I mean, given what's happening in Europe, the ungovernability, and other elements, the following question came in from an institutional contact. The turmoil in Europe poses an even greater threat to the United States and to Japan. The sequestration showdown adds a further element of chaos. What can we expect in the coming period?
You're in a breakdown crisis, and there's no forecastable result in sight. What there is a breakdown process in which all of the pre-established calculations don't work. You're now at a point where you're going to be dealing with nerve. Everybody is riding on nerve. And the Italian situation is typical of that. It's doubtful that the Italian situation is not going to go to another phase, which will not be favorable to the European system. Italy is the only nation outside of Germany and France which has not been knocked down so steeply that it still could get up off the floor. And with this stunt that was pulled, the chances are the best we can get, the best I can get from discussing this with our circles in Europe, is that the thing is very much in doubt. Everything is in doubt. It is likely that this thing will get extended. That's not certain. I think the key thing we've got to keep coming back to here is you've seen the signs of a breakdown in Obama. Obama has begun to lose his nerve. This creates a complicated situation, partly unpredictable, because Obama can fly off the handle and start killing people, or he can capitulate and lose his nerve and collapse. So those are the two directions. This thing with Woodward essentially challenged him in a way which I don't think Obama will ever get over. I think Obama would have to kill Woodward in order to get his ego back. But I don't think he's going to do it. And I'm sure Woodward doesn't think he's going to do it either. But when he was caught lying, openly lying, when he should have known the lie would come out, this shows a man who has lost control of himself. But he's a rage ball. So he may careen like a rage ball and cause a tremendous amount of damage. But the situation is now we have a war on our hands, a warlike situation politically on our hands. We have to keep our nerve. Don't panic. Don't go ground screaming and say the world is falling apart or anything like that. You've got to keep your nerve. What we have to do is concentrate on one thing. We know what to do to save the U.S. economy. The Glass-Steagall solution is the only thing. Now, look, you've got a complication here to look at, which most of you already know. On the one hand, we know that the Congress, especially the higher house, shall we say, is putting the lid on everything. So nothing is coming from there. But you have at the same time an outburst on the states in the state offices, which are now going in a direction which reflects the pressure on them. So we're now in a situation where we have a pretty good calculation of where the forces stand. We know that we're not getting anything from Washington right now, just indications. But we know what's happening in the states, and what's happening there is extremely interesting in the state legislatures. We are in a position to win, but there's no guarantee we'll win. What we do know, the president is losing his nerve. And in a situation like this, a president losing his nerve is something like a gone goose, whatever that may mean.
Well, let me ask you about something that also is no doubt enraging Obama, and that is the tremendous motion taking place around the country on Glass-Steagall. At this point, 10 state legislatures have introduced bipartisan memorials for Glass-Steagall, and South Dakota, home of Senator Norbeck, who as chairman of the Senate Banking Committee had initiated what became the Pecora hearings that brought out the abuses and excesses and crimes of Wall Street to help make possible the reforms that Roosevelt then pushed, including Glass-Steagall. South Dakota passed it by an overwhelming majority in the House after being passed through the Senate there. So here's a question that's coming from some of our organizing in Washington, D.C. That in the Congress, this is what we're running into. There is, on the one hand, a real revolt brewing against the hyperinflationary policy of Bernanke and quantitative easing. And congressmen are raising what you've said for a long time, that the Fed is bankrupt. But mostly this is coming from Republicans. When Bernanke testified before the House and the Senate, it was Republicans who questioned his policies. These same Republicans, who are against the printing press of the Fed and fear that it is bankrupt, still believe that we need to balance the budget by cuts and brutal austerity. On the other hand, among the Democrats, you have concern about the austerity, many citing the Krugman article and the situation in Greece and in Italy. Many of the Democrats are fighting austerity, and many are co-sponsoring the Glass-Steagall bill. But most of these Democrats don't understand what's wrong with Bernanke's policy. Some of them simply don't want to take on Obama, and some just think that the Fed will actually provide a stimulus. It's rare to find a Democrat or a Republican who understands that austerity, on the one hand, and the hyperinflation of Bernanke on the other, are the same policy. Could you comment on this?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Well, most people, officially, Washington, both the House and the Senate, don't know a damn about what they're doing themselves. And part of their stubbornness is a kind of stupidity which they adopt. They may not necessarily believe what they're doing, but they believe it's dangerous to their health or political health to do anything different than what they're doing. So therefore, both houses are essentially incompetent at this moment, which does not mean that they're personally incompetent. It means that their posture is incompetent. So therefore, we have to look at things from that standpoint. This thing cannot continue. It is going to collapse. This cannot survive. The question is, what's the problem? Well, what the problem is, on the one hand, we're getting from the states now, from the state legislatures, we're now getting a pattern around Glass-Steagall, because they are closer to Glass-Steagall than Washington is. So that's the difference. Now, what's the issue? I can solve this problem immediately. It's not a problem for me. I know what the solution is. I know it can be delivered on any day you want to have it delivered, provided that the members of the Congress will agree. What we need to do is simply go ahead with Glass-Steagall as we have proposed it. Now we have a document out, which is in publication, which identifies what this proposal means. We have stated exactly what would work. and what everybody else is saying to the contrary will not work. So that's the situation. It's no longer a matter of issues for discussion. We are the issue. I know and we know exactly what to do. It will work. The other guys do not wish to know what we know because is not convenient for them in terms of their relationship with others to do that. Even they, many of them, will be willing to discuss this issue practically, reasonably, and so forth, up to a certain point. So we have a situation where what I'm saying on our behalf is the only thing that will work. What the other guys are saying, especially on the federal level, will not work, could not work, will never work. Why? Because the whole system is intrinsically bankrupt, hopelessly bankrupt. It cannot be salvaged. I don't have a problem. I know exactly what to do, and it would work. We simply install Glass-Steagall with one additional provision, which we have specified. That provision is the credit condition. Under that basis, we just get the vote through. Glass-Steagall, it will sail nicely through in effect, because there's not all this other money which they're trying to save and account for with Glass-Steagall will simply go away and never return, because once it goes away, nobody's going to want it back again ever. So the point is, we have a big debt, a gigantic debt, an enormous debt beyond all belief. I say it's not a problem. We don't pay it. It's worthless. It's gambling debt. We only honor honorable debt of the United States. Glass-Steagall will do that, provided we have a credit system feature which provides the credit in order to start to expand productive employment and incomes. And I can do that tomorrow. If I were president, I could do it tomorrow. The whole problem would go away. There may be a bit of stir there for a while, but once people get the idea that this is set and it's going to happen anyway, I've got to take a deep breath, sigh, and say, okay, and accept it. Because we can solve the problem. I know how to solve the problem. I've said so. We've discussed it. It will work. And what these guys are saying will not work, cannot work, and never will work, one way or the other. So the issue here is, that's the issue. How do we get the jerks to stop being jerks, especially the congressional jerks and similar kinds of jerks? How do we get them to accept a solution? How do we get them to accept that phony money is not real money? And they're talking about phony money, Bernanke money. That's phony money. There's no wealth there. There's nothing in there. There's nothing redeemable in it. It's an impossible amount of money for which could never be paid off. And the longer you hold on to it, the worse it gets. What you have to do is say, hey, folks, guess what? Bernanke just disappeared. Now, we know he's not dead, but we do know he ran away. Where he went, he's not telling us. But he knows he is no longer wanted, and he won't be there anymore. And somebody, when they ask about that money, they say, well, we don't know where the money is. Bernanke had it. And what did he have, denomination did he have it? Nothing. He said he had it. No, the issue is our situation now is a practical one. It's not we are not commentators in this point. We have defined a solution which no one else has yet presented. It is a solution. It conforms to our federal constitution from the outset. It will work, as nothing else will. So what's the argument about? Why do people want to fail? Why do they wish to lose their lives, their families, their everything? by refusing to do the reform that will solve the problem. We know what to do. One of these brainless idiots is going to catch on to what that is.
Well, on the subject of brainless idiots, there were two hearings with Ben Bernanke this week on Capitol Hill, and what was exposed in the course of those hearings was that that the Fed is, number one, bankrupt, and number two, insolvent, which I guess is saying pretty much the same thing. But it was actually Senator Bob Corker from Tennessee had to write Ben Bernanke a question following the hearing, asking if, in fact, it was the case that the Federal Reserve was insolvent, as it came out on Tuesday from Bloomberg News, that in fact, when a stress test was done on the Federal Reserve using the exact same company that the Federal Reserve itself used to audit the largest U.S. banks, the results came back that, in fact, the Federal Reserve, so applying the same criteria used for the banks that this company audited previously, under an adverse scenario of the Federal Reserve exiting from quantitative easing, the mark-to-market loss on the Fed's asset book of $3 trillion would be $547 billion over 3 years. Now, that's a lot more than, I believe, what the Fed has in actual capital. So this was exposed. This has been publicly exposed. That cat is out of the bag. Yet, during these hearings, Ben Bernanke managed to gloat that as Federal Reserve Chair, he has had the best record on inflation, that better record than anyone in the post-war period. And that's not post-Afghanistan war, that's post-World War II. So I think it's interesting. In Forbes magazine, a writer for Forbes magazine noted that if Ben Bernanke has the best inflation record since any president since World War II, then Kim Jong-un is the tallest man on earth. Which makes an interesting point, because if you simply change the metric, and then in fact he could be, if 1 inch is now half an inch, if oil is $96 a barrel, up from $50 a barrel when he first came into the Federal Reserve, then hey, inflation's not an issue. But I would like to get back to the point. The Fed is bankrupt. In 2009 and long before that, you were on the record saying just that. People thought you were exaggerating. And now even the facts are undeniable. The Federal Reserve is bankrupt. You called at that point for the implementation of a new national bank. Yeah. So I'd like to get more of your thoughts on the implementation of a national bank, and in terms of what we're going to do with number one, the legitimate debts that we have, because as a nation we have legitimate debts, and number two, which you've dealt with already, the illegitimate debts. So how do we go from the Federal Reserve System to a national banking system?
Well, it's very simple, essentially. What we have to do is simply go back to Glass-Steagall and add the credit system feature, which I've stipulated. The rest of the stuff, forget it. Because when you go back to Glass-Steagall, when revert to Glass-Steagall, all that other stuff is of no account, is not the responsibility of the Glass-Steagall set of the banking system. Now you have two parts of the banking system. One is the credit system, the other is the gambling system. The gambling system is still there, but the federal government has no obligation to it. That's the point. This was a swindle, and we protested against it. We said, don't do it, it's a mistake. We said it was a fraud repeatedly. I said it in 2007. I repeated it in 2008. I repeated it in 2009. I'm on the record. I said, we don't owe this money. We never did. Because what they did is with this crazy law, which they put in, at the end of the term of office, what they did was essentially commit a fraud. Because what they did is they raped what had been the agreement on Glass-Steagall. They reinterpreted it. Well, if you can do that once, you go switch one way one time, and you decide to switch back, you go back to where you were to begin with. And you have to simply say, this was the thing that caused the depression. This was caused the crisis. This was the mistake that caused the crisis. Now, who's supposed to pay for it? Who could pay for it? No one could ever pay for it. You want to shut down the nation? You want to demand that it be bailed out? That means shutting down the nation. You want to shut down the nation of the United States and kill all the people in it? I think there's a strong argument at law to go back to Glass-Steagall with a addition of a credit system feature. That will solve the problem. But the key thing we've specified is we have to go with NWAPA, because we need a large project. We can do this, but we need a large federal project, at least one, which NWAPA would suffice to do. And NWAPA would mean that we would immediately set forth the machinery of a recovery on a mass federal basis. We're talking about perhaps 2 decades or 3 decades of credit to do that. But what we'd have to move, we'd have to get all the machinery required for the NWAPA project. We'd have to buy it, create it. We'd have to put it to work. Well, this would take probably a full generation to get to this point. But once we start that, that kicks everything into motion. Detroit begins to move its wheels. Other parts begin to move their wheels. So now you have a solid, real type of recovery of the United States, a real one. And we can do that. There are other things we can do. We can set an example for other nations to do the same thing on the basis of treaty agreements with them. And that will work. I know that. That's what I've said. This will work. What these guys are trying to say now will not work. It will destroy the nation. And I think the fact that the nation must be maintained is the point of law which must prevail in cases of this nature. We simply have to have the power of the government of the United States, the power of the institutions of government, to agree with me on that point, and the rest of the world's opinion just doesn't count anymore. We're back in business. And that's the issue here. What they're afraid of is the British Empire. That's the enemy. The enemy is the British Empire. And Russia has a problem now because they've made a mistake of getting involved with these crazy banking circles. And that is a swindle. It's killing Russia already. A mistake of getting involved with these Venetian banking circles. That's the obstacle there. But for Italy, it's doing the right thing. What Italy is proposing to do will work. They get a new government, change the thing along Glass-Steagall lines, and they're back in business. Why? Because they got the people of Italy behind them. Spain, they have no chance. But if Italy succeeds, Spain will join Italy immediately. Greece will have support. Portugal will have support. Other nations will have support. In which the question of the technicalities of legal paper agreements don't count anymore. When the existence of nations is at stake, the law is the survival of those nations by whatever means are appropriate for that purpose. The law does not exist on paper. The law exists in the authority embodied in human beings. Human beings make law, they destroy law, they adjust law. The law resides with human beings, not with toilet paper.
Well, you seem to have a harsh view of the Federal Reserve. I thought this was something worth bringing up. On one of the relations of the Federal Reserve to the Treasury, former Federal Reserve Governor Lawrence Meyer had a more optimistic view of things. He said that the recent revelations could present a significant communications challenge for the Fed. I think that's a great euphemism for...
Like drop dead?
Yeah. I want to ask you about sequestering Wall Street, and specifically about some of the ideas Michael Kirsch brought up in his new report on draft legislation to restore the original Bank of the United States. I want to ask you about the difference, some more about between monetarism and the credit system. What Michael Kirsch did was he laid out a positive idea about how our national finances and banking ought to work, to follow up on his previous pamphlet on the treason of Andrew Jackson, who illegally had shut down the National Bank. I want to read a quote from this report. It's actually a double quote. This is Michael Kirsch quoting the Hamiltonian economist Robert Hare, who wrote that under a strict system of law, credit is preferable to money. The man who enjoys the one has nearly an equal facility with him who commands the other in the purchase of materials for trade or manufacture. But the stimulus to industry or exertion is very different in the two cases. The mechanic who has $100 can live without work so long as it lasts. He may spend the whole or part in his pleasures, or for his sustenance, and may work proportionally less. But the mechanic who can command credit for the amount of $100 has nearly the same capacity to earn money as the other, but his privilege will not sustain him in idleness or dissipation. It can only be of use to him through the medium of industry. Prone in common with all substantial and hereditary wealth to subside into channels rather ample than numerous, the precious metals flow through a country in large streams, which carry out as much as they bring in, and contribute more to partial magnificence than to general fertility. While credit, springing up in innumerable self-created rills, diffuses a fertilizing influence throughout every region. Monetarism looks to the value of the past. Credit looks towards the future. The value in a credit system is recognized not in capital or money, but in the powers of the human mind to create and increase productivity into the future. So I'd just like to hear your comments on this.
Okay, very good. I have a comment, 2 or 3 or 4, on this subject. The point that most economists are idiots. It's the kindest thing you can say about them, because it lets them off the hook You know, you cannot convict an idiot of idiocy, of being an idiot. That's their profession. And most accountants are idiots. They really are idiots because they don't understand what the matter is of real growth. They believe that an interest or a comparable charge against a debt is the source of wealth. Well, it ain't. To get an increase of wealth, you have to have a system that generates augmented wealth. Now, let's look at how this works in terms of the animal kingdom, of living species, animal species. What do animal species do, contrary to what Queen Elizabeth does? Queen Elizabeth has a system on which more people, the economy progresses by people dying. That's the British system. Her policy is to save the economy of the British Empire, in large, by killing people, by reducing the population from 7 billion people to the order of 1 billion people throughout the planet. That's the Queen's idea of the growth of wealth, the growth of prosperity for her. Now, the fact of the matter is quite different. The fact of the matter is that the Queen of England is something that has to be terminated because there's no longer a place for it at the time that it finds that its own existence depends upon reducing the human population from 7 billion to the order of about 1 billion people. That's what she's insisted upon. That's what's being done under Obama on the direction of the British Queen now. The suffering that's proposed by Obama is part of a genocide policy against the American population in particular. So therefore, that's unlawful. And anything Obama wants to do in that direction is unlawful. It's mass murder. His banter about talking about killing Americans is part of the same banter. This guy has to be removed from office because he's violated the law. He's committed a crime against the nation. It's the highest degree of impeachable case. All right, now what on this thing? Where does growth come from? Look at the animal kingdom. What is the evolution of animal life? Animal life progresses how? By evolving to higher states. Huh? Now, we are not just animals, but we, in terms of our economy and economic systems, real economic systems, behave in the same way an intelligent human living species acts, evolves to a higher level, the evolution to a higher level. The evolution of plants, the evolution of animals is based on proceeding from inferior levels of development to higher levels of development. So the growth factor lies in that process, in that increment. The same thing has to apply with a human economy. What is physically correspond to reality in terms of a human economy is an increase of the productive powers of labor. Where does the wealth come from? The wealth comes from hatching eggs, in a sense. You hatch an egg and you get more chickens than you started with. So that life is naturally tends in the direction of the increase of wealth from under the animals or anything else. Now, what is the Queen doing? The Queen is saying we're going to take a 7 billion human population, reduce it toward 1. What does that look like? That looks like the self-inflicted termination of a species. So where does wealth come from? It comes from what we call the noetic characteristics of living processes. These characteristics take two forms. In the animal form, the noetic principle is expressed in terms of animal evolution and breeding of animals, in interaction of species, in producing the growth of wealth, in this case, animal wealth. How do we do with mankind? Well, mankind has a quality which the animals do not have. mankind has a noetic capability of discovering principles of creativity which do not exist among the animals. Therefore, when you invest in production, you're investing in improvement in the rate of productivity of the human species. And that's your source of growth. If you have your dumb accountant comes in and tries to advise you on what makes things work, of course, accounting practice as taught is incompetent. It may not be incompetent for accounting practice, but it's incompetent as a policy for society. And society is based on the advancement of the intellectual capabilities of mankind to higher degrees of productivity by discoveries of principles, new principles, higher principles, by development of new species, of developing of species that didn't exist before or you didn't have before. You take a territory and you're growing something there. You say, well, we're not getting enough money. We're not getting enough income. Well, why don't you bring on this other breed, this improved breed? And just instead of just doing what you're doing now, why don't you add some animal species that actually will increase the fertility and productivity of farming? And so that's one of the ways you're talking about, but that's not what I'm not emphasizing that today. In any case, so that's the point, that the economists in general are competent as long as they don't have to be competent. That is, they have practices which they are habituated to using. These practices, insofar as they're using productivity as a means, they work. But if you need to advance a nation or a whole planetary civilization, you must go to higher degrees of energy flux density. You must find higher means of growth. And therefore, what enables you to maintain a society and to let it grow is to increase the productivity per capita of the society, the per unit of land area, and so forth. The problem is now that as long as you're trying to do what the Queen of England does, it doesn't work. Now, why doesn't the Queen of England want to have England grow? There must be a reason for it. Because if you allowed the British people, instead of getting fat and useless, to become productive as they could be, you're going to create a situation in which the oligarchy is no longer wanted. The history of mankind is that the oligarchy, as a factor in human existence, has always depended upon keeping the majority of the population dumb and reduced in numbers. That is exactly what Obama's policy is. That's the Queen of England's policy. Reduce the population. By what? Doing what? Lowering the productivity per capita of the population. That keeps it stupid and dependent upon the oligarchy. But in order to do that, they have to reduce the population because they've got to reduce the productivity. And that's what the Queen of England is up to. And Obama's nothing but her stooge. So give us back our own country. Give us back our American system. Give us back our science driver programs. Give us back these kinds of things. And we shall do just fine. But the oligarchical system, of which the British monarchy is an exposition, will not allow that. We have now come to a point of showdown. Is this society, is this planet meant for human occupation and human consumption, or is it meant for the oligarchical bestialization of a shrunken volume of mankind?
All right, well, this will be the last question of the night, and it comes from Bill Roberts, former candidate for Congress in Michigan. And It was announced today, Governor Rick Snyder officially declared a state of financial emergency for the city of Detroit. It's more than likely that Detroit will become a ward of the state of Michigan. They're calling it a managed bankruptcy, and part of the proposal is to have the appointment of an emergency financial manager to head the city. And this has been ongoing for a number of years in Detroit. They've already cut police and fire, which has directly led to the increase in death rates among people living in Detroit. You have a situation where, reported in the papers, mothers are killing their children because that's how bad it is. Now, as a candidate for Congress, Bill testified in front of the Detroit City Council multiple times. I'll add that he and other LaRouche PAC organizers in Detroit had been in direct communication through public testimony and other means since the 2007 crash. But in March of this year, Bill testified before the Detroit City Council and spoke on the LIBOR manipulation, saying that saying to look to the LIBOR rate rigging, and he demanded in a follow-up letter to the City Council that Detroit doesn't need a financial manager. Detroit doesn't need a European Union troika, a EU-style financial manager. That a financial control board over Detroit would kill Detroit, just like the EU's financial dictatorship over Greece is killing Greece. Mm-hmm. He said in that letter that the effect of increased austerity on the population of Greece has led to a worse collapse of the economy. And at that point, he urged that change from any policy that involves further bailouts or further austerity cuts. And he encouraged the City Council to immediately adopt a resolution for the reenactment of Glass-Steagall and to support their congressman in signing on to the bill in the House of Representatives. It's also notable at the time that Bill testified in March that one of the members of the City Council said on the LIBOR rate rigging, what came to her mind was that when AIG collapsed in 2008, and they defaulted on some of their agreements, the city of Detroit was left with an enormous bill. And she said AIG got a bailout. The city of Detroit didn't. Additionally, Obama in 2009 said he was going to be the hero of Detroit with the auto bailout. So much for that. In 2012, he actually said during his campaigning that he would not let Detroit go bankrupt. So, all of that being said, and with what Detroit represents in the United States as the first stop in our westward expansion in our nation's history, in the industrialization, the arsenal of democracy, Bill wants to ask, in a sense, a loaded question, because this is not a local issue. What do you recommend that the Detroit City Council do now to defeat this blatant drive for economic fascism?
Well, let's go back to what I said in reply to the previous discussion point. It's the same thing. You can't do this just on a Detroit basis. That's the problem. I fought on the liquidation of the auto industry against it some years ago. We lost. And the result is that we lost productivity. We reduced the productivity of the United States. We did not improve anything. And what was the problem was strictly that these investments, which were swindles, were piled on top of the indebtedness of the industry and of the cities and states. So my solution has always been, since that time, was we go back to the idea of, look, we had the greatest amount of floor space, of manufacturing floor space imaginable in the United States as a result of World War II. It existed. What I campaigned of when we had the fight to try to save the auto industry in the United States was exactly that. We have this floor space. It's still there. It's productive floor space. We built tanks. We built aircraft. We originated whole designs of aircraft and all of these things during World War II. And the growth of productivity was enormous. Then came Truman. And Truman had a policy opposite to that of Roosevelt. Truman had a British policy. And he started the cutbacks. Instead of using the war production capacity that we had at the end of the war, which should have been used for production, relevant production, capital in formation, should have been used. Instead, Truman, under the British direction and similar kinds of infestation, shut back the productivity. So we were left with a large amount of debt left over from the war, which was never liquidated. Not really. Because we did not go back in and say, okay, we're not producing war materials right anymore, but we're going to do better. We're going to take all of our technology, keep our people fully employed in their skills, improve those skills, go to higher levels of technology in the United States. We didn't do it. You came to this question of the Detroit crisis a few years ago, and this was the issue. We had people from all over the industry, from the aircraft industry, all aspects of the aircraft industry, as well as the auto industry. We had the floor space. It was counted. We had the people. They were known. We could have immediately expanded everything, all kinds of production. It's the same thing I said before in the previous question. You're breeding growth. That's the way economies have to work. You breed growth. It used to be, you'd have people came to the United States. Many of them came poor, very poor. They came from Italy, they came from Spain, they came from other places, very, very poor people. They came into the United States. They had one generation. And this next generation would be improved in its condition of life following that. And the third generation, you'd begin to get doctors and scientists and so forth as the key people. And that's the way the United States system really works. It's the system which I described before, just on the previous question. And therefore, the idea of economy is not based on objects, on the production of objects, or the sale of objects, or the purchase of objects. It's based on the productive process. That you go to always higher levels of productivity, which mean that you're more productive when you go to higher levels of productivity. You're now more productive. You've increased your value. You've increased the value of everything down the line, multiply. And that's the only way things go. Now, so therefore, when you come in with this British system, the British accounting system, which all these idiotic, the accountants are not to blame for this as such, but what they did was stupid. What the accountants were trained to do under these policies of after the post-Roosevelt policy, was clinically insane. The principle is not that money does not produce wealth. That's the mistake. Investment in money does not produce wealth. It does exactly the opposite. It's investment in production, which is then reinvested in more production, which is reinvested in more production with increased productivity. That's how wealth is generated. And that's what we've got to get back to. So to do that, you mean you have to kick the British out of the United States. That is the British monarchy. Kick her out of the United States. We don't want her around anymore. She's got bad ideas. She spreads diseases, especially economic diseases. We don't want her around anymore. We want to go back to the American system. We want to go back to the exact same system that the greatest figure, the great, most inventive figure in the George Washington administration designed. The principle of increase of productivity, the productive powers of labor. And that's the only solution. Everything else, anybody comes in with some other proposal, get out of here, you damn idiot. You're just making a mess of things. We need to go back to the production system, which was understood by the first administration of George Washington. And that's the only solution. Anybody else comes up with some other idea, some other line of conversation, some explanation, some route for this and route for that, forget it. They've all been discredited. They all failed. And they fail more now than they ever did before. Just change the system. I'm ready to do it. How about you?
If you haven't read it yet, Michael Kirsch's most recent report is available on the LaRouche PAC website. It's titled Draft Legislation to Return to the Original Bank of the United States. That brings a conclusion to our webcast tonight. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Leandra. And thank you all for tuning in.